Okay, we're talking with Max Butler, who builds Max Butler amps today in Eaton Rapids, Michigan. And I wanted to talk about some of the aspects of the amps that he builds, how long he's been building the amps, and what kinds of people he's built amps for in the past. Max, how long have you been building amps?
Since 1978, August of 78.
And how many amps do you think you've built?
Not many, 300 or 400 at the most.
That's quite a few for one person, though.
Well, yeah, I don't have any employees. It's not a factory.
Right, completely understand. So these are what we would call today boutique amps, but when you started building amps, there wasn't a word for that. They didn't call them boutique amps back when you started building amps for people.
That's right, and actually the way it started, actually at that time, point-to-point wiring wasn't a big thing. Every amp didn't have printed circuit boards.
Right.
Most of them did, but still there were some around that were point-to-point wiring. And the way that worked out, I was playing a Marshall at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And a Marshall is a good amplifier, was then, still is. And the only thing that's different about a Marshall, and this isn't critical, it always sounds like a Marshall. And it's a good sound, but I wanted a little something different. And it was going to be a rock and roll amp, so I built it as a rock and roll amp and put some of my own doodads in it. And that makes a difference. And it's subjective, of course. Not everybody's going to want that. But I liked it. It was what I was after, and it gave me a little more swing on the tone controls, and not to get into an American sound, but at least a little different sound of a rock and roll sound. That worked out pretty well. In fact, it worked out so well at that time that I ended up working for other people. People wanted an amp that sounded like that. And my first 50 amplifiers were just straight rock and roll amplifiers, and they all sounded alike. And I had my own custom wound transformers all the way through. And it sounded a little different than other amplifiers. And it just kind of kept going. And I built that amp, and then I modified it to where you could have a dirty channel and a clean channel. And when you went from the dirty channel to the clean channel, it was still a little bit dirty. It was Rolling Stones clean, but would never clean up.
Right.
And that wasn't bad. There's lots of rock and roll going on, and people were satisfied with it, and I liked the amp too. Played it myself. But then, along about the mid-'80s, probably when New Wave came along, things started to change, and there were more clean passages. Still rock and roll of a different form, a little lower key. So people were interested in a clean channel, and that's when I went to the switchable. And some of the manufacturers did too at that time. Probably the only deviation was that I was switching channels, but I was also switching potentiometers, volume controls, so that they were separate. They weren't sharing volume controls.
Right.
And that worked out real well, but it was still a rock and roll amp. But the clean channel was cleaner, and it was clean all the way through, and it had its own master volume for somebody that wanted to go Rolling Stones clean. And I still build that amp, build quite a few of them.
And that amp's the Silver Hammer amp.
The Silver Hammer.
Silver Hammer amp.
Yeah. And I will continue to build that amp because rock and roll's always going to be here in one form or another.
Now you told me the master volume control on the Silver Hammer, when you first built your first amp, that was basically, in my words, a version of a better 50-watt plexi. You built it to have a master volume control where the original plexi only had one volume control. Is that how I understand it? Is that right? You built it so you had a master volume, and the original plexis don't have one.
Here's another. That's a good question, because the original plexi had two channels, the same actually as what I had. But if you'll recall, going back, they had 4 inputs.
Right.
High sensitivity, low sensitivity, one for each channel.
Right. Right.
Well, the players finally found out that if they could cross-channel those and go in on the lower sensitivity one, the clean channel, along with the straight Marshall sound, that they'd get a little bigger sound. And now both volume controls worked.
Right.
And the volume controls were just volume controls, no master or anything, just volume controls. And some of the guys that I knew were playing them that way. I thought that was a good idea. I did it on my own. And my idea was that I'm going to set them up on the inside of the amp so they're always there. So you don't have to cross-channel anything.
Right.
And they're always there, but one's working, or you can have the other one working just with the volume controls. But then it got more interesting when you got to the master volume, because the master volume would not affect one channel exactly the way that it did the other. So I ended up putting 2 different masters in, and that's when we started switching to masters. Different values, different locations. And that worked out real well, and I'm still using them that way. And both channels can run at once, or you can just have one channel at a time. So the way I started 32 years ago. And that amp, I have made no changes in it except for a change of capacitors. Some capacitors that have come on the market more recently I am using. But other than that, there's been no changes in it in probably the last 15 years.
Now my Silverhammer amp is a head with the 12-inch speaker in the bottom, Celestion speaker. And you told me most of the Silverhammers that you build, if not all of them, are that way. Cabinet is separate from the top. Can you tell everyone why you prefer to have the cabinet separate from the head?
I do, and I think what you're saying is that I prefer a freestanding cabinet over a combo.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know some people are not going to agree with this, but and they've told me so.
Right, right.
I try to talk people out of combos unless they're chasing a sound that is a combo sound, and it's not a bad sound.
Right.
I'm just saying it's subjective. When you go out of the realm of the subjective and take a good head, not necessarily a butler head, any good amplifier,
Right.
and you put it in a combo in a little box with the sound bouncing off the sheet metal and the hard iron of the transformers and the glass. You get a breakup and some frequency cancellation that you can't control. And in doing so, it does alter the sound. And that is a combo sound. And again, like I say, there's a lot of people going to do, I like my combo. And that's true. And they've told me so. And I understand it. But just if you want to measure a good quality sound of the same head in a freestanding, good quality cabinet with a good speaker that fits the cabinet, you get technically a better sound.
Right, right.
And I've A-B'd these for people, especially country players, and I show them the combo, and they say, "That's it. That's what I'm looking for."
Right.
And I understand that. Nothing wrong with it. It's subjective.
Now your other amp that you build is called the Swamp Amp.
The Swamp Amp, yes.
And you build 3 different voltages, or 3 different wattages?
I do, and I haven't been building that amp long. I'm going just about to start my 15th year. For a little over 14 and almost 15 years. And it started out as a prototype. It was going to be a hot-wired basement. And the person that I built it for said they liked it real well. And they said, "What about reverb in that?" To which I replied, "Have you ever played a bassman with reverb.
Right.
Yeah, and we both kind of chuckled over that. And I said, I'll tell you what, I hate to tinker with it if you like it, but I can always put it back, and I'll try to put the reverb in. And I did, and I didn't have a bassman anymore. It was never really a bassman to begin with. I mean, not resistor for capacitor for tube, right down the line.
Right.
But it had bassman characteristics, which is a good guitar amp. It always has been. And by the time I got done putting the reverb in and making the necessary changes to the front end of the amp to accommodate it, I came up with a hybrid of somewhere between a twin and a custom amp. I will say it that way. It sounded like a Fender, and it lost a little bit in the process, and I had to work with it a little bit to get it back up where the sound was bold. And I have done that. It took me about a year. Actually, I built 5 of these prototypes before I sold one, or let anybody even try it. They were failures. It didn't sound good. And I do a lot of that. I try things that don't work sometimes. You can do all the math and everything, and when it comes to guitar amps, math doesn't mean very much. I mean, it's a kickoff point, it's a benchmark, and it gives you something to work to. But the real answer is to stand back and say, oh, I like the sound of that.